Hello, everyone, and welcome to the weekly edition of the Rose and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chawla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by Brunella Rosa, CEO and Head of Research. Lots going on in the world this week, but today we're shifting our focus to central banks and to macroeconomic policy. Central banks are starting to decelerate their pace of tightening in quite a fractured geopolitical and macroeconomic environment. And today we want to take you through some of the key central banks and what the recent decisions were, what the key drivers were, and what that meant, what that means. But let's talk about the sort of really broad outlook first, Brunello, because the global economy is clearly decelerating. The sort of latest IMF forecasts certainly say that. And inflation and energy prices, seem to be on the verge of peaking in recent months. Could you tell me a bit more about what the key factors are over the last couple of months that are driving these sort of major shifts? And what are the broad consequences of this for central bank policy?
Yeah, so the background of all this is that economic activity is decelerating around the world in the most advanced economies, but also in some key emerging markets, including China, which actually is going to see a growth rate this year just over 5%. So it's almost at levels that are from developed economies. Very long gone are the days when China was growing in double-digit figures. The global economy is decelerating, as also shown by leading indicators, and inflation seems to be peaking. Among other factors, because energy prices have somehow fallen in recent months. Oil, because of the incipient recession. So, of course, energy prices, oil is very sensitive to growth forecasts. And gas, because some of the disruptions that were caused by the war somehow have been circumvented by some of the key economies out there. So, global economy is slowing down, inflation potentially peaking. This means that central banks have done most of their job to normalize policy rates. So bringing them from abnormally low levels to normally low levels, if you want, around zero, just above it. And now they're at normal level, which means a rate that, of course, varies country to country, but effectively for major economies around 2.5%, 3%, depending on the jurisdiction. So most of the job has been done. What happens after that is the tightening of monetary policy and monetary condition, meaning that it's not simply a normal rate, a normal policy rate, what we are serving, but is actually a restrictive policy rate, meaning is a rate that is supposed to further decelerate economic activity.
Right. I mean, maybe it's then worth sort of checking out what all these central banks are doing kind of region to region. We might first look towards the United States, where the Fed recently on Wednesday made some major decisions. Could you take us through what those were and what motivated those decisions?
Sure. So last week in particular was extremely busy for central banks. Also, this week has been somehow more surprising than expected, if you want, because the BOJ came out with something quite unusual. We'll discuss possibly later on. So starting from the most important central bank, the Fed. Well, the Fed has telegraphed is 50 basis point increase in December for months now. So not a surprise that they came up with that. Then they reiterated that they're acting meeting by meeting, and then they are now closer to the peak in the tightening cycle. But again, this peak has been revised upward. And Powell, during the press conference, try to reassure market that there is not a Fed intention to cause what they call a hard landing of the economy. But they also said we need to be tough on inflation. We need to break the back of inflation. And either we do it now or we don't do it at all. And we don't want to repeat the same mistakes that were made in the 70s when, after increasing interest rates aggressively, Volcker then cut rates too soon, inflation came back, and then they had to redo everything again. So learning from the mistakes of the past, the Fed will probably keep rates at very elevated level, restricted level, wherever this level is, for a prolonged period of time.
I see. And, just the day after that on Thursday, the Bank of England delivered a very similar 50 basis points hike in its rates. Was the thinking behind that similar, would you say?
Is somehow similar, although inflation is more worrying in the UK because it's still in double digit, while in the US is already around 7%. The UK, we're still about 10, 11%. And in fact, the MPC was split. There were a group of MPC members who thought that actually no further hike should be requested because already enough has been tightened, and the effects would be felt very much down the line. The vast majority, of course, voted for a 50 basis point increase that eventually was deliberated. As one MPC member voted for a 75 basis point increase. Now, the UK is seeing inflation, which is both supply bottlenecks driven and demand driven, like in the US, because the fiscal measures to contain the effects of the pandemics were also generous. But there are some external factors there. There's, of course, Brexit, which is behind a big chunk of the current inflation, and all those strikes that have been put in place by the various unions that, of course, are causing their own way of being a supply bottleneck. So the UK situation is a bit more complicated than that in the US, and needs to be monitored very closely in coming months.
And then looking forward towards sort of broader European market, what's the European Central Bank doing? Is it similar? And I also heard the Swiss National Bank is doing something. Is there again a similar logic here, or different motivators driving these things?
Yeah, last week we also saw ECB, SNB, and August Bank acting. Most of the reasonings were similar. So the ECB normalizes rates, brought the DFR, the deposit rate, at 2%. And from January, they will start going into restrictive territory. Most importantly, the ECB announced the beginning of QT, quantitative tightening, a bit sooner than initially expected, which was perhaps in Q2. Instead, we are going at the end of Q1. It's going to be a tryout period, if you want, for 4 months. And after these 4 months, they will calibrate the facility to reduce the balance sheet in a more definite way. But that was enough to cause, for example, an increase in intra-EMU spread, among the most important one, the BTP Bund spread. Swiss National Bank is facing a slightly different situation because, of course, inflation is 1/3 of that of other countries because of the strength of the Swiss franc. But they went out of severely negative interest rate. Well, let's say severely for this standard, so minus 75 basis points, and they are now in positive territory. Norges Bank, they say actually Norges Bank has been the first central bank in the G10 grouping in increasing interest rate in September 2021. And now they've reached 2.75%. There's another 3% already priced in at some point next year, but they can actually increase twice more, so effectively going to 3.25% at the very least in the early part of next year. So all these major central banks and some of the smaller central banks have acted similarly.
All right, and if you look at the Bank of Japan, it's always been an anomaly in terms of policy rates. What is the Bank of Japan doing?
So the Bank of Japan have been by far the most patient, also because inflation has been extremely low for a very long time. So they could afford to wait. But as soon as inflation reached a level around 3 3.5% that seem unacceptable, so to speak, they start working on the framework more than on rates. In fact, they allowed the target range for the 10-year yield under the yield curve control facility to fluctuate not just 25 basis points, but slightly more, 50 basis points each side. They effectively want to allow the market to go into a price discovery, see what the market will price the 10-year yield, and also allow people to start trading again, because that's effectively what the market should be doing, not the central bank. And now there've been entire generations of people who never actually actively traded JGB. So central bank is moving in that direction. Somebody reads that as a precursor of eventually moving out of negative rates at the short term, possibly, as long as the curve remains somehow steep, just to favor banks and their intermediation process. So the Bank of Japan waited forever, eventually surprised in December 2022. They have been used to surprise, and they did it again.
Yeah, especially in a sort of environment where 3.5% inflation is seemingly outrageous and needs to be acted upon. Must be an interesting one to live in. But I think all these actions that central banks are making a lot of progress in normalizing these policy stances, especially if we kind of recall back to the post 2007-8 era of these sort of endlessly low interest rates that we thought this boom would last forever and would sort of never die out. Perhaps this is the sort of starting of that curve shifting a little bit. And perhaps in the UK at least, there's a fear always of central bank policy deviating from that of what the government was doing and coming into friction with what the IMF said, particularly the Truss government. But it seems like now it's complementing Rishi Sunak's fiscal policy.
So it seems, yeah.
Yeah, all sort of many things to watch in the upcoming weeks. But as always, thank you so much for your time and insight, Brunello.
Thank you. Until next time.